The sweet, warm release of an international break. I've always liked them. Welcome back to the PinkUn.com Norwich City podcast. After what is a rare home defeat for Norwich City, 2-0 to Bristol City this weekend. I'm your host, Connor Southwell, joined by our usual team. No rotations, no squad issues. Paddy Davitt, Seaman and Adam Harvey have all made the trip up the hill to reflect on a pretty grim afternoon in NR1. So I guess, Paddy, let's get straight into it. How much of what we're seeing at the moment is injuries? How much of it is a lack of depth? How much of it is players being pushed to the limit? And I guess how much of it is probably all three of those things, making what is probably a pretty perfect storm or imperfect storm for Norwich City at this moment in time?
Well, I mean, the evidence is stacking up now. 3 points from the last 6, 3 defeats now this past week. So for me, it's both. It's the injuries to the key players, and then graphically illustrated from the game we've just watched this afternoon, the difference and the drop-off from, if you want to use a more prosaic term, the stars to the understudies, and that's not to dig at any individual, but as a collective, you lose Gunn, you lose Sargent, you lose Nunes, you lose McLean. What's coming in underneath them isn't anywhere near as composed, as good as what that group is. And for me, it's the difference between a squad who can, or a team, should I say, who can, as they have done here this season, hold their own with Sheffield United, hold their own with Middlesbrough, hold their own with Leeds, to what we've now seen in this run, albeit Middlesbrough was one of those 6 games I referred to, which is way off promotion conversation. And if they continue on this trajectory in terms of results, it's looking over the shoulder. It's not worrying about what's happening in front of you. And that's quite alarming, really, that within this group of players you have that difference if you are to take out of the equation probably their best 4 players, certainly their most 4 effective players. So, as I wrote about in my point, it's where the measure is. If you're a Norwich fan now this evening, you've been at that game today and you've seen the results and performances in this last 6, where do you put your measure? Is it mitigation for all those factors, which we'll get into in due course, or is it more accusatory in terms of, well, the recruitment hasn't been good enough? Look at the lack of squad depth in this group of players. Even now, maybe start to question Torup and his coaching staff that they haven't been able to stem the flow in certainly this week, certainly Sheffield Wednesday, and then today Bristol City. To produce 2 very lacklustre offerings from those players. Is there some coaching questions have to be asked of that? So all in all, yeah. Far too many questions, not enough answers, and the reality is this group of players, shorn of the ones I've mentioned, are nowhere near good enough, and that was visibly illustrated today at Carrow Road in a very forgettable 90-minute offering.
Yes, indeed, and it is, and I think, and it's worth mentioning is Bristol City had a lot of key players out, but I think it's the other elements that you spoke about. For me, this is almost a 3-layered debate. Maybe you guys will have some more sort of things to throw into it, but it is the injuries, and it's difficult because fans don't want to hear about injuries. And I think we were pretty dismissive of the injury crisis that was maybe painted last year, and I'll come on to that a little bit later. But that clearly is a factor when you take 9 players, probably all of them who would be in and around the team, if not the squad. It is going to make an impact. So there is that, and that's not deniable, but it's the same for other teams. It's the players that are being asked to step up, players like Jakob Sorensen, who haven't played a lot of football, Emiliano Marcondes, who didn't have a club a little while ago. Lots of different aspects to that. And then I guess the third sort of layer is the depth point. And this one, I think, probably is the point where maybe it feels like more of the blame, if you want to use that word, more of the questions perhaps are being asked about some of their recruitment. The fact that they've got I think today, a lot of projects on the pitch and players who could be something and could develop into something, but at this stage aren't there yet. And that means that the depth is quite big between those frontline options to sort of the backup options that you do have. And it's difficult, isn't it, Sam? Because you can't have a squad of 35 players all on par with each other, because it would be very expensive. It would be very difficult to manage because you'd have players who want to play every week. So there are reasons why that is the case. But those are kind of the 3 layers that I sort of see behind where Norwich City are at this moment in time.
Yeah, I think it's tough because you take 9 or 10 players out of any squad in this league, and what you're left with probably isn't much better than what Norwich offered today. I thought you saw that actually from both teams who were both affected by injuries, and the fact that these are two teams who a lot of people were tipping for promotion and for being in and around that playoff race. Both of them have highly rated head coaches, and they've looked pretty good at times this season. But today was actually quite a poor game, I thought, in general. Not much entertainment, not much really to enjoy from a viewer's perspective. And although I thought Bristol City did as much as they needed to get 3 points, it wasn't really a game where they had to be at their best either. So I think any team in the league struggles with this number of injuries, and probably any team in the Championship, even right at the top end, doesn't look great when they've got this number of players out. But there are still some in that 11 who can do better than today and who can play better than they have over the last few games. And of course, there is mitigation because good players help other players to look a little bit better. And there are people like Anis Ben Slimane who you could definitely criticise for his performance today, but equally, because of the situation, has probably been put back in the 11 a little bit earlier than is ideal, and looked, to be honest, like a player who was asked to play 87 minutes when he had already missed a few weeks with a hamstring problem. So, I feel for them a little bit, because although it does look quite bad, those injuries do mitigate for it to an extent. But equally, there are plenty of individuals who you've seen perform a lot better at different times this season, and where you maybe want to see them stepping up to those levels and becoming key players and taking advantage of the responsibility that they've got, they've almost shrunk back into themselves without some of those players to help them out. And that's where the disappointment will be for Norwich, as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, and I think that there has been a pattern over this last 3 weeks, Adam, which is there was a lot of Cardiff that was really good, I thought, and if that game would have ended at, what was it, 86 minutes or whatnot, when that equaliser went in, I think we'd have all been going, wow, what a resolve this team has, what brilliant character they showed to have all that adversity and come out with a win. But they concede a goal and collapse to an extent. You saw it on Tuesday night against Sheffield Wednesday, where they started pretty well, conceded a goal, collapsed, never really recovered. You saw it again today. I thought they started pretty well. Both, and I know the Marcondes chance, I think, is going to be maybe thrown out as the headline of that spell, but they created opportunities and pretty positive openings before and after that, and never really recovered. So it's I think through this spell, and Torp right at the start of it was speaking about how you'd see which players would kind of emerge and put their hand up and be ones that maybe wanted to kind of grab the initiative and take it forward and really state their claim. I think with the exception certainly today, maybe of Oscar Shortau, who I thought there was at least some positive intent and some willingness to try and make things happen. I don't think we've really seen anyone put their hand up and be counted in this spell. And as Sam said, there's reasons for that. Some of them have been pushed to the absolute limits, and I think you can see today we're running on fumes and performed in that way. But equally, it's still the case that none of them, probably throughout the 3 games, have done enough to warrant them being in the conversation if a full squad of players was available.
Yeah, it feels like a team for me that's lacking a bit of leadership. Sort of, I think the balance has tipped too far in terms of youth versus experience. I mean, you kind of need that core of leadership, experienced players that have been through adversity, and maybe when they do concede a goal, they've been in that situation before, and they can maybe help that younger core group of players to kind of get back in the zone straight away and go on and kick on again. And for me, it's, as a group of relatively young, I think there was 3 players today under the age of 21. It just feels like maybe that balance isn't quite right, and it's difficult. Difficult moments, difficult places they've gone to as well. Cardiff City Stadium, they concede the goal, the place is absolutely rocking, and I think in that situation, it's quite difficult then to try and remain strong and hold out. And I think obviously as ended up with that game, they conceded a goal, and even Tuesday night, I think you could probably sense if you could have got an early goal or Norwich were on the front foot, maybe those Wednesday fans were starting to turn a little bit. But as soon as the goal goes in, that place becomes really difficult then, and it's almost then about managing the game and not crumbling and conceding quite a few goals and making that defeat look worse in terms of a scoreline than what it was. And today was similar. I think that first goal goes in maybe against the run of play, and heads dropped a little bit, and when you're sort of looking around the team thinking, okay, you got Shane Duffy there, but you've not got your Kenny McLeans, you've not got your Angus Guns, your Josh Sargents that will help maybe this group kind of come through that moment and sort of go back on the front foot and attack teams, which maybe they've had in other games where they have had difficult spells. Derby, they concede a goal, but they're straight away back on the front foot. So, yeah, I think those injuries, hopefully when these players get back, maybe that balance looks a little bit better again, then that will be positive. But by the same token, the concern is definitely there's a lot of players there that haven't really stepped up in recent weeks. Jakob Sorensen is a player that's got championship experience, and I thought he was very, very poor today. So, yeah, it's difficult looking at that squad, particularly the number 9 role. Sienats hasn't really done anything through the middle. Marconde's had some good moments today, but again, I think he's actually looked more effective in that sort of midfield position than what he did today in the false 9 role. So, yeah, a bit of a concern about the lack of squad depth and maybe some recruitment in terms of, trying to make this squad, when there is injuries, have options. And I sort of look around now, and as you mentioned, Oscar Svartal's maybe the only one that can come out of today. And even then, I think first half he was pretty poor. So it's difficult moment. And yeah, I think it's definitely one that Torup and his coaching team will have to investigate and consider during this next international break.
Yeah, it's fun, and look, we know what the Championship is like, and it could turn again very quickly in the opposite direction. But you look at where Norwich were after the last international break, and look, we certainly weren't having these conversations, but some were having the conversations about, is this Norwich group now able to go and push for top 2? I always felt that was a little bit overblown, if I'm honest, and in the same way that I think maybe this run of games to an extent will be maybe in the other way a little bit overblown. I think the truth and the reality of both of the runs have probably been somewhere in between for the reasons that we've outlined. Norwich haven't, and yeah, of course they have on the pitch. They've regressed to that perspective, but it's not the coach that's regressed to that. It's not. It's the situation that they're in and various different factors. So, and I guess maybe this is a question that I'll ask all of you, starting with Paddy maybe, which is this run from the October break to now. Mitigation, injuries, yeah, absolutely. For you, how much of a concern is it? And is it something that if you were a Norwich fan, you'd be sat at home tonight ahead of this international break, feeling pretty concerned about the direction of travel based off what you've seen in the last 6 games or so?
Well, concern feels a bit over the top at this stage because it is, as you rightly said, as Torup said, 2 or 3 wins / defeats in this league dramatically alters the picture. You see how concertina the Championship table is at this stage, and it will continue to be so for some time. So that's always at the back of your mind that things can turn. But the concern for me is the difference between, without wanting to labour the point in the previous segment, between the quality end of the squad and the rest at this stage. You'd use the word projects. They may in time prove to be decent and maybe better than Championship grade in a Norwich shirt, but in the here and now, they do to a collective look some way off it. Certainly, if you measure them against those senior players we've discussed. And for me, I would stop short of concern. But what are we encountering now is injury / suspension in McLean's case. It's unrealistic to think that there won't be, over the course of the remainder of the season, more injuries, more suspensions. So are we going to be back in this cycle where you lose, maybe not the scale of a senior player all in one go, as it is now, but there will be clumps of players missing, key players, and are the ones underneath that far off it, then we're going to be back here again. So if there was a concern, it'd be that. Is that on the evidence of this first roadblock, as it were, in terms of the season? They've been found to be well short of what's required. Because let's get it straight, Bristol City are an average side at this league. Sheffield Wednesday are an average side in this league. I'd go so far as to say Preston and Stoke are right in here and right now. And Norwich have come up, not good enough in all of those games. Middlesbrough accepted. But so that would be a concern. That even the understudies are not able to get them results against some of the poorer sides in this division in the here and now. So, yeah, not in terms of the longer term direction of travel, because I think we'd seen enough in the previous games that this head coach, with the playing resource that he has available, if he can get them on the park, then no, there'd be no concerns at all. But the challenge for him now is almost short-circuiting this process, because that today, I said it to you on the walk up the hill, that today was Farke 17-18 all over. Too many of that season was those type of performances. and in amongst that with the shafts of light, and of course then there was almost let's be honest, a hugely surprising 18-19 off the back of it. But I don't think 17-18 gave you the confidence that would follow. That was so far removed. But today was, so poor, anemic. I mean, really, if Science hasn't got his shooting boots, this group of players aren't going to score goals. Again, 60+% possession, 3 shots on target recorded, same as at Hillsborough midweek, nowhere near good enough. And that again today, another 2 conceded. That's 12 in the last 6. That's nowhere near good enough. If you're going into a championship game of football shipping 2 goals per game, how do you on earth propose to get any points? So, you don't have to be a pro-licensed coach to realise that he's got problems in both boxes, and the answers probably do need to come from outside your frontline players, for the simple reason is we'll be back here again this season where you will be without players through injury and suspension, and they have to come up with better solutions than they have done so far.
Yeah, and I think maybe not the counter to that, but I think the point I would make around that, and this is why I think some of it, particularly around sort of the injuries, I know you put this to him on Thursday and he sort of batted it away to an extent, but you look at that, I'm trying to think what 3-game week it was, where he basically played the same 11 on 3 occasions and maybe looked to the bench for changes. But when you play what Norwich want to play, which is, and the stats show this, the most intense brand of football, both with and without the ball, and you don't rotate your squad, throwing Nunez in when they threw him in, some of it I think is self-inflicted, and there probably does need to be some review about that type of thing. But the point is if you get injuries and suspensions and you get 2 or 3 of them, I guess you can throw 2 or 3 of those project players in, and they're almost, and to an extent, I think Seaman is maybe a good example where he can be carried by the team. He can be carried by some of those senior guys. I guess that the fact is at the moment you're asking those project guys to be the ones that carry the rest of the team, and they're just not in a position to be able to do that. So yeah, same question for you really, Sam. How concerned, not concerned are you feeling by what is 3 championship defeats off the back of 3 draws? Yeah. So, yeah, how concerned, not concerned are you about this run of form at this moment in time?
I would break it down into almost subsections and probably individual players, because there are certain players there who maybe haven't been at their best in those games and haven't looked fantastic, but I wouldn't worry too much about. And there are others who really are quite far away from, I think, where they need to be. You look at Oscar Schwartau, for example. He's 18 years old, and even though he's given the ball away too much today, there have been times where he's shown the right intent. He's turned into midfield. He started a Norwich attack, and he showed a little bit of quality. And when he's that age, you don't really need to worry about it too much. It's the same probably with Gabriel Forsyth, who obviously won't be involved for a few weeks with this knee injury, but is the same age, has shown loads of quality for someone his age, and looks like somebody who in the future will be really good. Same with Emiliano Marcondes, who maybe doesn't look quite up to scratch or like he's a key player when that's what he's being asked to be, but ultimately he was brought in as a free signing midway through the season and probably was expected just to play a squad role. And I think what we've seen from him suggests that he's perfectly capable of doing that for Norwich over the next couple of seasons. But it's the likes of maybe Ante Cianats and Amankwa Forson, who, yes, have just arrived at the club, but they're both 21. I think they cost combined about 13 million. And you'd expect that if they're going to justify those values in future, they would be showing, if not their full potential, then at least a few more signs of, of the quality that they can go and show in the future. Whereas it feels like they are probably quite a lot further off where you'd want them to be, considering I think Norwich will hope that in the future they can be Premier League quality players, and they're struggling to really make their impact in the Championship. So I think you'd almost divide it into 2 columns in the concern bracket and try and work out from there whether the pluses outweigh the minuses or if it's the other way around. But for me at the moment, they've got so many players at such different stages and with such different contexts that it's quite hard to judge whether everything as a whole is worth being worried about or worth being excited about. And I suppose what I would say is that this is what being in transition is. This is what a lot of people expected going into the season, and this is how it's panned out. There's a lot of different things to keep an eye on, and probably a lot of things going wrong as well as going right. But I think they've been fairly unlucky in a sense, because in a way they've been victims of their own success. They started so well, and we saw those wins over Hull and Watford in particular and how good they looked in that sense. And it did raise the bar quite high, and probably had a lot of people thinking, that Norwich could go on and achieve more than just mid-table or transition. And as easy as it is to say when that's going on, that you need to keep your head and not get too excited, I'm sure on a subconscious level there were people whose expectations were raised and now aren't being met, understandably, by these performances. So I think Norwich have been fairly unlucky in that sense, and yes, there are some concerns, but also I think amid it all there are some positives for the long term, if I think maybe we're seeing the reason why Norwich are probably unlikely to go and get promoted this season.
Yeah, agreed. And yeah, I think that's right. I think there's definitely a part of me that feels that this whole sort of one step forward, two back has maybe wrong-footed people a little bit, because I think you're right. I think there was probably a widespread acceptance that this year was going to be a case of building and accepting maybe that there was going to be some difficult moments, and they're definitely in that at the moment. But I think it's more maybe what came before it, and that maybe just probably put their thought in the mind of, okay, maybe this is a little bit better than what we've... And it's a team that, as we said, when fully fit and when all of those options are available, and you've got that midfield trio that has the blend that we've seen with McLean, with Slimani, with Nunez, and they basically haven't had that for the last few games. But you see that, you see the forward line, Science, Sargent, Cianats, you can kind of see pieces there where, if that 11 was the one that could play for 46 games, you'd probably expect Norwich to be in around that top six conversation. But as Paddy maps out, 46 game season, that's never going to be the reality. And so you have to accept along the way that there are going to be games and moments like this where they find themselves in tougher positions. And where does that leave you? It probably leaves you somewhere in the middle ultimately, when you have those big variations and those big swings. So I probably feel they're about where I expected them to be, really, which is maybe why I don't have a great deal of concern at this moment in time, with the recognition that there's going to be players coming back, and I think they're going to play a lot better than this. And actually, I think they probably should have more points on the board than they do at this moment in time. So to throw it to you, Adam, same question. How concerned, not concerned are you by what we're seeing at this moment in time? And what are the elements, I guess, maybe stoking that concern or not making you concerned?
Yeah, I think it's probably just, tempered expectations maybe a little bit. I think a lot of us maybe fans, naturally, when you see positive performances and positive results and all these players in fine form, you probably get a little bit more ahead of yourself and excited. But I think patience has always been the word, and that's probably where we are at the moment. This is going to be a season of highs and lows, and at the moment Norwich are in a pretty low, but then you almost take it back to this time last year. They had a similar kind of period where November was really poor. They had some really, horrible performances. You go back to Sunderland and Blackburn, and at that moment in time, everyone thought, this team's going to get relegated, and look where they ended up at the end of the season. So I think it's a little bit early days still. It's not ideal in terms of, the level of injuries and the fact they've all been out at the same time. If it's just one injury, you can almost get around that a little bit. But I think when you've got this level of them, it's difficult, and it's still a very young team, and, it's in transition. It's going to take time. And I almost look at maybe where Sunderland are at the moment. I felt this time last year they had lots of really good performances with a very young team, and now they've suddenly clicked, and obviously under a different manager as well, and maybe he's just got the best out of players that I think we could see they had talent, maybe Joe Bellingham or Mundell, that are now actually showing every week that they're consistent, and the players that even below them are sort of now at a level where they can come on and try and compete. And I just think Norwich aren't quite there yet, but I think they're on the right path. There's lots of exciting young players coming through. Callum Fisher had another decent game today, and I think he's proving his worth still at the moment. And Oscar Svartau, lots of good moments. But Torp said it himself the other day. In a realistic world, if Norwich didn't have this level of injuries, they'd have wanted to try to bed him in a little bit this season, maybe get him some minutes off the bench and just get him used to the Championship, used to kind of living in England, completely different culture. And the fact he's had to ultimately be thrown in for a 3-game week, that's not down to him really, that's just down to the situation. And, I just think in time, this period, we'll look back at it and think, yeah, that was a good learning curve for these players, a good learning curve for Torp and the rest of his coaching staff. And I think there's still lots of excitement. Obviously you've got the AGM this week. I think new kind of investment as well from the top. I think in time, they'll hopefully, if Ben Napper, we've seen some good bits of recruitment, and maybe there's also some question marks. I don't think they've ever really replaced Johnny Rowe, to be honest. I mean, Cade Gordon doesn't quite look up to it yet. A little bit, a player that obviously had a bad injury, and just for me, just maybe not quite at the level yet to really be a star player in a championship team. And I just think it's going to take time. Maybe if they get a replacement for him in January, and then you start to maybe kick on a little bit. And Sarri, his creativity in midfield, you look at kind of the options now. You've taken Nunez out of the team. There's not really that goal threat or assist threat in midfield. So maybe that's another area they need to look at. I just think it's going to take some more windows and more time. But I'm still excited for the future because, I think given where they were last year and sort of that turgid performances, maybe they were getting the results, but it wasn't exciting to be at Carrow Road where, today it wasn't exciting to be at Carrow Road, but I think there's mitigation for that. And, I think if you're a fan, you've just got to stay positive.
I think Adam's right to highlight that sort of learning curve and like Schwartau as the example, because those minutes that he probably would have got in the role that he was brought in to play, for example, how long does it take him to build up the amount of time that he's had on the pitch in the last few weeks? So I suppose, yes, there are major negatives in terms of the way that Norwich have played and some of the results, but hopefully in the future, things like that will be stages of the rebuild that they've been able or probably forced to skip in a sense, and that some of those players will be a bit further ahead in those journeys than maybe they would have been otherwise. So I think that's probably a positive, and although it's quite hard to find them at the moment, there are a few players there who will be a lot further along in their improvement and in their acclimatisation to this system than maybe they would have been if this hadn't happened.
Yeah, and I get it's tough for fans as well, because I think it's easy to have a very and it's why we love football, because it's so emotional and it's so heart on sleeve, and you're either the best team in the world or you're the worst team in the world, and there's not often room for nuance. But I think at this moment in time, it's very much don't chase tomorrow or don't do something by chasing tomorrow that you're going to regret in 2-3 months' time, and that is very much the case of where Norwich are at. And I compare this period, and I know people are going on about, you can't use the injuries as an excuse, etc., etc., etc. And I think David Wagner got pretty, made me angry, strong, but I don't think there was much praise for us in terms of how we maybe framed the injury situation last year, which I think he was overblown, if I'm honest. And to compare maybe where they were then to where they are now. So this is the team that Norwich fielded in that 3-1 defeat to Blackburn, Paddy. They had George Long in goal, Stacey, Duffy, Warner, Yanulis was the back four, Sarah and McLean was the midfield two. They had a free behind the striker of Rowe, Nunez and Hernandez. They had Hwang up front. Subs that came on in that game, Kellen Fisher, Christian Fashnacht, Shemiswav Poeta, Borja Sainz. The bench, Reyes, Gibbs, Ida, McCallum, Danny Bart. I mean, that's a better squad than Norwich City have available right now, isn't it? And I guess that probably shows where they are, as Sam says, in their cycle of building and development in terms of the squad, and probably proof that it's going to take windows, probably plural, to build a squad that is capable of maybe getting into a position where promotion becomes a realistic probability.
Yeah, I mean, that purely on those names, that is a better Championship matchday squad than we've seen today, than we saw at Sheffield midweek. Probably we've seen in this 6-game cycle, most of anyway. But that's the short-termism of the here and now. Yeah. I mean, let's zoom out. Why is Torp now in this club? Why is he the head coach? Why is Napper above him, brought in as well this time last year? It's to set a different course, something that isn't 90-minute to 90-minute cycles of football. It's about, to paraphrase what Torp says, and it's relevant to the point about the squad, is to not block pathways for young players, putting youth development at the core, reconnecting that academy pipeline as well. You've seen that phrase used a lot recently. All of those elements, I think in the mid to longer term, will bear fruit. But when you are facing a 3-game week and you don't have Angus Gunn, you don't have Josh Sargent, you don't have Nunez and McLean, and you have committed to that, then you're going to get Schwartau, you're going to get Forson, you're going to get Cernach, even to an extent Fisher, although he's sort of maybe made the transition now. I think it was 4 actually players 21 or under in today's lineup, if you include Callum Doyle as well. So it's probably entirely reasonable to expect that they've had this fallow period in terms of results, because if not, then they're not really what they're trying to do is essentially bring through young players. But with young players, you get an inconsistency, you get a rawness, and you get clearly, if there's too many, and I think Torop acknowledged this in the week, that these selections now, because of the lack of room for manoeuvre, has tipped too much towards youth. And with that, you get a sense that they're way short of what's required in the here and now to win games of Championship football. So it is in that regard an imperfect storm, but I think we have to be mindful, of not being buffeted by, the short-term element of course, and Torop himself has acknowledged this, that has to run in train with trying to get results on the pitch. That's what they were successfully doing up until this period. But I think really it's just because of the injury situation, the level of injury, the player who's out in terms of seniority and influence, his room for manoeuvre is completely eroded to the point now where, he's having to effectively rush back Anis Ben Slimani when he said quite clearly a week ago he won't be ready this side of the international break. He came with a hamstring issue. He's managing that hamstring issue. I've only been able to play him in 60 or 70-minute cameos. Well, today, A, he's back ahead of the international break. B, he's playing, I think that's probably the longest shift he's had. So that tells you how much of a needs-must situation Torop has found himself in this particular week. And as a result, I think, we have to be mindful not to get too far down the path of what's gone wrong, the wheels have come off. I think it's more the circumstances that were all coalesced around a model which is for the mid to longer term, not for the here and now. And as a result, it's probably just a reality check, really, that, as we discussed there, people who were post-Hull, post-Watford, starting to think this group are ready now. They're quite clearly not as a collective, because it's going to have to be a collective to get out of the Championship, and that's been illustrated by this period where you've been without some key players. The ones underneath in the here and now are not good enough. They're not ready. And if you've got too many of them in your 11, which they have in these last 2 or 3 games, that magnifies that sense of they can't handle the ebbs and flows within games. They can't deal with the problems they're being asked to try and unpick. And Torop could be reinventing the wheel in terms of a coach, but if his playing resource is so limited, doesn't matter how good a tactician he is, and we've seen how good he is in terms of his in-game management, but a coach is only as good as his players, and right now those players aren't good enough to get the right side of these results. But as I say, for me, it's understanding what the journey is, and that this is a very small fragment within that longer term journey under Torop, under Napa.
I've almost wanted to say to people, it's very, very difficult because of how football works, and I think everyone at every stage, every point in the season, looks at league tables, looks at where teams are, looks at points gaps. I almost want to say to everyone, just forget about it, but that's impossible. But to me, it feels at the moment just such an irrelevance where Norwich are in the table for those reasons that you listed, because this is about something that is in a sense bigger than whether they're 14th or whether they're 10th or whether they're 5 points off the playoffs or whether they're 2 points off the playoffs. It feels like something that's bigger than that and building bigger than that, if that makes sense. The one, just to end this part, and then we'll come into the second part and we'll maybe speak about some of the stuff like recruitment and some of those elements. But the one that I think has irked me in terms of those absences the most, and the one that I think has been really detrimental, and if I was a Norwich player in the dressing room at the moment, the one that I think I'd be really angry about is the Kenny McLean one, because that is a player who is senior, is captain Norwich City. He's made a very emotional tackle, first and foremost, and a tackle that I think, irrespective maybe of what Torop thinks, is probably deservedly a red card. But to then go for the behaviour that he went to then get himself an extra game, I think is incredibly disappointing for a player of that seniority and that standing within this group, and a player that this group desperately needs. And I think if I was a player, I'd probably feel a little bit let down by Kenny McLean. I'm not sure there's maybe been enough criticism of that situation as a whole. But obviously, he's now got an extra game as well that means he'll miss West Brom. But yeah, I think that's disappointing that a player, you could kind of forgive him if it was an Oscar Shortall or someone that had put himself in that position, but not someone who's played as many games as he has. And the squad are missing him desperately, I think, at this moment. His stability and the almost metronomic qualities that he has. Part 2, we're going to talk about recruitment. We're going to talk about strikers or lack of, and all of that good stuff. We'll see you in a second for those chats. Welcome back to part 2 of the PinkUn.com and Norwich City podcast. Been quite cathartic so far, I think. Actually, I've quite enjoyed it. Where do you want to start, Paige? Do you want to go recruitment or do you want to go strikers? I'll let you decide in terms of which way you want to take this next section of the pod.
Strikers, I think, is the most topical, isn't it? In a sergeant-shaped hole that they aren't able to fill.
Okay, let's do that then. So today we saw a change, and that was that Marcondes was utilised in that role, almost as a kind of false nine type situation with Seanats back on the right. That felt to me probably a decision to try and get Seanats maybe back in a rhythm and a confidence level that maybe had evaporated. Also maybe an acknowledgement that his performances maybe hadn't quite been where they needed to be. Where do Norwich City go with that? Because, like you say, the options are limited. Seanats is a striker. Well, he is on paper. He is a striker, but we can debate whether he is a number 9. But beyond that, their options are looking a little bit short. Ashley Barnes is maybe going to be able to be thrown into the mix after the international break.
Go absolute curveball here.
Go on.
El Hernandez. Don't rule it out. Other side of the break. Go back to that. I know it was Stevenage. I know it was the League Cup, but he actually looked like a centre forward that night. Admittedly, he needs service, but
He'd at least give you something in behind, which is
that,
what I don't think they
goal,
had today.
All seriousness, that goal. Remember that goal now? It's come back to me. Dare I mention his name now? But Abu Kamara, McLean, Jack Stacey, razor shot back to front, cut across from Stacey. Onel was there on hand. Very good finish that night. I only throw that in because, with the greatest respect to both Marcondes and Cernach, they're not offering what Sargent offers. And I'm not saying Onel would necessarily, certainly to the max. But I think you would have some more mobility. You'd have a presence up there. He's got that pace to get in behind. And I think in a side that's creating chances, and maybe the stats on his career wouldn't back it up. But then, he hasn't been played as a striker. But I just think there would be a presence there. And if I'm being brutally honest, I don't think Cernach or Marcondes is going to give you that presence, which is the one thing that Sargent does give you, aside from the goal record, obviously, which I think anybody else in this squad would not be able to replicate. But in terms of offsetting, I think out of possession, you get more from Hernandez up there. I mean, Barnes, yeah, okay, he might be the first go-to option. But then, given his injury situation, and he's never been the most mobile of strikers, I'm not sure you get that necessarily presence from him.
Was very effective in Vincent Kompany's Burnley. I think that's worth saying.
Yeah,
wasn't it?
that's true. Well, true. That is true. But he had. I mean, I was trying to think of the two wide players. He had
Benson,
Sahari, wasn't it?
Benson was one, wasn't he?
Yeah, I think.
Yeah.
And was it Sahari? Yeah. I mean, they came here. I remember they came to Carrow Road that championship title winning season, and that was a very effective 3. You're right, and a little bit of everything. So, yeah, I wouldn't rule out Barnes, but you do have to question, whether he can get back to that level of effectiveness from his Burnley days, certainly. But yeah, the fact that I would justifiably throw Onel Hernandez into a discussion on Norwich's number 9 probably does underline the lack of resource. But if not, then I don't know where the answer lies, because Sargent isn't available for the next 2 months. He's had the groin surgery start this week. Cernach, that experiment seems to be over before it probably even began. As I say, I don't think Marcondes is that's the top of his skill set is that suited to that type of player. Because what you're trying to do here is almost map to what Sargent gives you, because he was very, very clearly the model of striker that was what Torrop was looking for in that system, and there's no other option that will give you what Sargent gets from within the current roster, but who can get you as close to that, and you can debate how close Hernandez would get you to it, but I just think it's not the worst shout, because If not, then I don't know where they go between now and January. And Torp already made it clear on Thursday that January isn't going to be, a splurge in terms of spending money on strikers. So where do we go?
I've got another curveball.
Go.
Which I think is in a way linked to yours, but maybe slightly different. I'd be tempted to no, not that much for a curveball. I'd be tempted to push Borja Sainz in there, on the basis that I think, let's be honest, as a left-sided player, he's not bothered about what's behind him. I don't think he offers Doyle a lot of support, but I think he gives you a lot of the pressing qualities that Sargent does. He's a very effective counter presser. He's somebody who I think, as we've seen, has a real goal-scoring presence about him, has, for all of the hype around some of the goals outside the box, I think he scored quite a nice range of goals this year. My only issue would then be what on earth you do on the left side in that. But I actually think, well, this is where I was coming to. I think if you were then in a position where Hernandez could come in to start, I think he could give you something quite nice on that left side with Sainz centrally then.
Do you not worry that it's a struggle to get him involved then, though?
Yes.
When you've obviously got players out wide, it's much easier.
I'm not sure he's that involved anyway at the moment, not in terms of Norwich's build-up.
I don't know, I feel like at the moment he's...
At the moment he is, because they're giving him the ball and he's trying to beat five men.
That's true, yeah. And I suppose the last couple of games have showed how ineffective that can be at times. But I suppose I'd also worry about his presence with his back to goal, and I think he does give you the running in behind that Hernandez or Sargent probably would. He's got a decent turn of pace as well, but physically he's obviously not anywhere near the same stature as a Sargent or even a Hernandez. So that would be my main concern in that sense, although it would be good to get him in more central areas and between the posts a bit more often. But
I think as well with him though, if you were to put him central, I think because of his form at the moment, if I'm an opposition defender, I'm immediately dropping 5 yards. I'm immediately going back. I think he just plants a seed in people's heads as well, which could be helpful to then creating space in other areas of the pitch. But it is just what on earth you do on that left side, which I'm not quite sure how to solve.
Yeah, I think it probably is the time to try a few curveballs and test out your options. And that's, to be honest, what Marcondes today felt like for me. And actually, even though it maybe hasn't worked out amazingly, although if he scores that header, we probably are saying, it's inspired. But the reason why I wouldn't be too angry about it from a Norwich perspective is that they're in a position now where they do have to try things. And even though it hasn't come off really today, it's either that or you stick with a formula with Cianats through the middle that wasn't really working in those previous games. So, I suppose that will be an intriguing part of the team selection going forward. And I'm sure until something clicks that we will see a few options tried out, because with the pace at which championship games come, 7 weeks from now is a pretty difficult amount of time to lose your main striker for. So I think there could be a few interesting experiments. I don't really have any major curveballs that I can throw in there, certainly not to the tune of the ones that you two have offered. But I think it will be interesting to see if they can find a solution to that. My instinct now is unfortunately a negative one, and to say that whatever they try, they probably won't get too close to replicating Josh Sargent. But the reason why I wouldn't be too upset about the Marcondes experiment today, or maybe trying either of those two players in that position, is that they've got to do something, because they haven't looked at any point like a team that really has that threat in behind or that central presence, and they do need to try something to try and replicate Sargent as much as possible.
I'd say I'm going off on a bit of a tangent here, but I tell you what I miss about sort of like 10, 15 years ago. You remember when you'd have those centre halves who could go and play up front? Norwich had a few. I know Dion did it a few times, but like Gary Doherty was a striker, wasn't it, at various points? I know Rob Newman, I think, did it in the 90s. You don't see that anymore. You don't see like Grant Hanley going and playing as a striker, and I think the game's poorer for it. Adam, do you have any other curveball or salute? Oh, he does. No. Here we go. I'm excited for this. Come on.
Christian Fashnak through the middle. We saw it at Northampton away, I want to say, in pre-season. I'm pretty certain he started through the middle. But I just think, purely from like in the box, I actually think he's quite an effective player, which we saw last season at different points. When he's not having to do the run-in, not having to beat players, I think when he's just purely in the box and he's been given service, I actually think there's someone there that can score goals. And particularly if you've then got Borja Sainz one side, and maybe you've got Onel as another option out wide, and experienced head as well. Just just think it could be an option. I mean, I'm not fully sold on Christian Fasak, and I also don't think he's going to be here at the football club longer term, because he doesn't really fit the sort of vision of the club. But I just think in the short term, in terms of a physical presence that could probably hold the ball up a little bit as well, and even last year I saw sort of moments where he's quite comfortable kind of slotting balls in behind. I just think when you've got Signs and potentially Onel to throw back in the mix, or even Gordon with his pace off the bench, maybe I just think there could be an option there to try it. But the fact Torp's tried it once at Northampton, I'd have to get his assessment on what he thought of that particular performance. But I just wonder whether that's potentially another option.
I don't hate it, I don't, which is again maybe indicative of the situation where Norwich are at the moment. But I'm sure there'll be others out there who have solutions and players. So yeah, let us know maybe how you go about solving the situation that Norwich are in at the moment. But I think underpinning this sort of striker debate, Paddy, is another one about recruitment, and maybe Norwich's inability to bring in another striker who could supplement slightly what they're doing. And you think about the Norwich team, I think we discussed this in maybe last week's pod, potentially. Might have been one before that. But you look at teams that have been successful at Norwich, they've always kind of had two or three. You think of Jordan Rhodes in that 18-19 season, Jordan Hugill maybe in the 2021 campaign, where they didn't score bucket loads of goals, they didn't play huge amounts of games, but they came on and they were very effective, both in terms of maybe easing the load on whoever the front person was, but also in just chipping out. I remember Rhodes scoring one at West Brom, actually, that rescued a really important draw for Norwich in that run-in, and he scored, was it Sheffield Wednesday? No, it wouldn't have been Sheffield because he was on loan from Sheffield Wednesday. He scored Villa, I think it was, where he scored a double that was really important and got Norwich over the line. That's the kind of player that they're lacking at the moment, isn't it? And you think about the recruitment, and I think the way that we sort of mapped it out through the summer was, Seaman was obviously the one that they looked at to not replace as in like for like, but to be the body that replaced Dida. Gordon was obviously the body that was brought in to replace Kamara and allowed him to go off to Hull. As Adam mentioned earlier, the one that I'm probably sat around looking at, who did they bring in to replace John Rowe? There wasn't a natural kind of body replacement there. And obviously with Seaman as well, and this is worth factoring in, he wasn't the player that they went for initially. It was Yildirim, wasn't it? Was the one that they wanted, who is perhaps a bit more of a natural striker. So all of that makes the discussion, I think, about recruitment and attacking recruitment, because I don't even necessarily think it's hindsight to say they've left themselves a little bit short in that area.
Well, I mean, that is the nub of it, isn't it? That they went for you could call Yildirim an attacker, but I think he was far more of a central player between the width of the box and Cernach is. So they clearly felt, as he was their primary target before that deal fell down, that they were after that player, that profile of striker. So the fact that they pivoted then to Cernach, it would appear maybe the appeal there was that he's a multifaceted player. His profile in Poland would tell you that, but nominally, I think a wider player who can cut in and then looks dangerous in central areas, certainly on his show reel in the Extraliga in Poland in that one season. But as has been proven thus far, it's clearly a big step up from that level to the Championship, whether it's as a wider of a three or down the middle. And I guess underpinning all that is you expect Sargent and even Barnes, because Barnes' injury situation now wasn't the case in the summer. They didn't expect him to be out this length of time. So if you're looking at it as Napa and you're moving the pieces around on the whiteboard, you're thinking, well, we've got two frontline strikers there. Even if Barnes wasn't immediately ready at the start of the season, in short order he would have been there to dovetail with Sargent. And then you've got in Cernach maybe a more versatile option to add to the mix. But that was the thinking in the summer, then that's what is recruitment, isn't it? It's kind of, we spoke to Lee Dunn recently, the head of recruitment. It always gets filtered through in the here and now or in the last window, and what's that translating to on the pitch, and that's why at the moment it looks a little bit jarring that maybe they've left themselves exposed. But as I say, if it had gone the other way and Yildirim had come in and had stepped in now into Sargent's absence and proven himself a capable operator, and you had then Barnes to come back in, nobody's having this debate, are they? So I guess it's that hindsight thing with recruitment. We look backwards, they have to look forwards and look into the future and try and assess the situation. And all you hope, and this was the thing that maybe dogged his predecessor, is that over successive windows you get more right than wrong, and that's a point Lee Dunn made, that you need to if you're Norwich, for all the reasons we know about, the relative expenditure that they can commit. You need to get more right than wrong, and if it tips too far the other way, then you get the situation that they've encountered in those seasons around the Premier League, is the one that we all think about, that summer going back in 2021, where it was not fit for purpose for the here and now of that coming season. So it's a tough one. I mean, we're sat here and it looks like they've got it wrong in terms of the top end of the pitch, because we're now having to have a debate about Fashnacht, Hernandez, your suggestion about Borja Science, none of that suggests that they've been strategic and targeted in their recruitment. But as I say, I think we're able to have the luxury of hindsight, and that wasn't something that's afforded to Napa and Adams and Torup in the summer. And really, as I say, at the risk of restating what we've already stated in this debate, they went for a striker in Yildirim, and that deal they didn't push the button on it. So should they have, with hindsight now, gone back into the market for a striking option? Well, let's see what they do in January. January might tell us what their thinking is now in terms of what they did in the summer and whether it was fit for purpose or not by what they do now in January.
Yeah, there's an element of the George Long situation, isn't there? Because we can look at it and say he's not up to standard and he's not that good of a replacement for Angus Gunn, but in the same way that it's hard to get someone to come and sit on the bench as a goalkeeper in the Championship, it's quite hard to tell a striker, okay, the best striker in the league is going to be in front of you, and you're a number 9 who can't play anywhere else. So Well,
they had that problem with Adam Eder, right? He got stuck in that sort of in between for such a long time, and ultimately impacted his development.
Exactly, and you're looking at a striker who in Yildirim they're probably having to tell, you won't be on the pitch for that long. It's difficult for him then to adapt to life in England and to the Championship. So in Seaman, I think there's an argument to be had that you needed somebody. If you wanted somebody with a good amount of quality, you needed somebody who could play another position as well. Because if Seaman can't play out wide, then he sits on the bench for most of the season. He's extremely cold when Josh Sargent then does get injured, and you're playing somebody through the middle in a really, really important role who probably he might not even have had a Championship start at that point. So, I think Paddy made the point well in that hindsight is an easy thing to look at transfers with, but equally, it's so hard to get any player with any real Championship quality in to play behind Josh Sargent, because they would have known that it's going to be really, really difficult for them to get any playing time.
Yeah, agreed. And again, we're talking about players. Seaman, I think Gordon's another one who quite obviously were not the first choice options in those positions. But I think in Seaman as well, I see a lot of Josh Sargent in that first season. When he came in terms of physically, I'm not quite sure he's there. There's clearly an ability there, and I think there's a few times where you've watched him and you think there's a player in there, but there's so much more coaching and development and game time that he needs to get himself up to the level where he's effective at the top end of the Championship in a team that wants to be more than what it is at the moment. So, yeah, I think it's a really difficult one. So, I guess that maybe to go from looking backwards to looking forwards, Adam. That January window, and it's always difficult. We know what a difficult window it is, and they brought in a striker last January, who people were then asking questions about why they brought him in. So it is a difficult world, recruitment, and it's a difficult period. But I think the way it's going, the way it's panned out, obviously looking at a Sargentless situation for the next 2 months, I don't think they're going to go in the free agent market, because for maybe all the reasons there usually is, all the best ones are gone, and to bring someone in now and say, right, mate, you've got 2 months before a window opens, where you're going to spend a lot of that time just getting them up to speed and getting them fit anyway. So it feels pointless to go down that route. But January, as Paddy says, it probably does feel like they need an addition in that area, be it a loan, be it whatever, and that's going to be tough, because we know what that window's like.
Yeah, and notoriously Norwich have not had that much success. I don't think sort of down the years with January signings, loan players, whatever it might be. You know, you sort of look back to sort of the big windows where they spent big money. You know, that sort of almost iconic Premier League summer or January, sorry, when they brought in Naismith and Closer and Pinto, and you know, obviously patches of success maybe for Closer and Pinto, but on the whole, it was a pretty poor window in the way they spent that money. And I think a lot will maybe depend on where they are as well in the league, you know, and where Josh Sargent is in terms of fitness by the time we sort of reach that, because, you know, it is going to be kind of, you've got a limited time frame to try and bring somebody in, and you don't want to almost commit a big expenditure on a player that you haven't maybe done as much research into. I know these sort of, you know, as Lee Dunn almost said in his chat, they've almost planned windows ahead, and they've got lists of players obviously at Colney that they are intrigued by and want to try and go for. But obviously you also need the availability of the player they want. You know, I mean, they might have a player in mind, but if he's not willing to be sold by the selling club, then you can't get him. And if it's a case of waiting game and you wait till that summer window where, you know, if Josh Sargent has scored some more goals and there's interest in him and Norwich aren't in the Premier League, he's probably going to be sold. You then need to look at that replacement, and maybe that summer window, that player is then available and you think, yep, he's the perfect fit to replace Josh Sargent. What you don't want to do is go and commit a big amount of money. Josh Sargent becomes back fit and available, and then he's just sat on the bench, and then you're looking at it almost in, you know, the situation of where we're sort of at in terms of the previous debate as a player that's, you know, sat there almost frustrated and kicking his heels because he's not getting on the pitch. So it's a really difficult one. I think the loan market's maybe where I would look at maybe if Norwich are in a situation where they do need another forward, just because, you know, you're then not committed to buying that player with, as we saw with Sidney Van Hooijdonk, you know, a player that just did not grasp it. And if Norwich had have gone and purchased him, we'd all be looking back thinking what a waste of money that was. So I just think that's a situation maybe. But then again, as I said at the start, I think Norwich notoriously have not done very well with loan signs in January. So something needs to change if they're going to find a good one.
Yeah, and it can often be a want to do something for the sake of doing something. I think as you map out, if it's not the right one, it doesn't fit in where they want to take the group in the future, and it doesn't fit the way that they maybe foresee the squad going, then it would be silly to bring in anybody who doesn't fit in with that. So, and this is where January's so difficult, like you say, because it's about availability, and quite often those players are not available, particularly at the top end of the pitch, and they cost significantly more. So therein is where the challenges lie for Norwich City over the next few months, I think. And yeah, how quickly this situation eases or not, we shall see. International break, there's everyone watching, there's always been a massive fan of them, so I'm absolutely delighted to see this one back. How are you going to be spending yours, Paddy? Nice, feet up. No, obviously we've got an AGM this week, so it's probably going to be quite busy this week, but any plans?
Trying to think now. No christenings this time around, so should be a bit quieter.
Never did get a piece of that cake, but it's all right. I might hold you to it.
Yeah, you wouldn't have liked it, mate.
I probably would. It's fine.
No, you're right. No, we're having our office meal. We should maybe talk about that. You know, that's going to be a bit of a highlight. So, other than that, no, I can't think. I mean, it's all about the AGM. That's where the focus is this coming week. So.
When's the first question about sausage rolls or something along those lines going to be asked?
Burgers, isn't it, normally? Yeah. I don't know. Probably in the Q&A at some point there'll be something about catering generally, I'm sure. That's a banker. But, yeah, I'm more interested to hear what the de facto owner now, moving forward, Mr. Atanasio, has to say, both on the short term and more importantly, the mid to longer term. That's always a fascinating insight, you know, to get them in that setting. So that's probably the first part of the break. We might do a few other extra bits and pieces. We might do a Spaces, didn't we? We said we might do a Space. Yeah, we might have a little dabble at that. Sam could talk a bit more about Spaces. Give that a plug.
We've got something exciting coming as well.
Remind me.
In terms of a few former
voices. Yeah, of course. Yeah. That's going to be very good. That was that exciting. I'd almost forgotten about it. Yeah, no. Well, it's to be fair.
It's really big this up.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, we've really promoted this one to the hilt, but it will be worth consuming. That I promise. And it's tied in a way to the AGM because obviously the AGM will be the first without Delia and Michael on the top table, no longer on the board. And we've gone and spoken to a few individuals who know them quite well and who Norwich fans would know and synonymous with their time, 28 years. So that should make a nice package. Yeah, so keep it locked to that. But other than that, it's going to be just counting down to West Brom, I think. Yeah, and hopefully they get some of these injured bodies back.
Sam, any plans?
Not really, aside from that that work meal.
I thought you were off for a test match in that jumper, to be fair.
I don't know how to respond to that, to be honest. It's quite a curveball to throw in there.
I like it. It's a compliment.
I appreciate that.
Just reminds me of the Ashes. That's all.
Yeah, I don't really, as you know, I don't love cricket loads, so I don't know I don't know much punnage that I can offer you in that sense. But no, I certainly shan't be watching any. It's not my plan to get into cricket over these 2 weeks. But yes, my friend's birthday, might go back to London for a bit for that. Yeah, not really much else. Probably just be scrolling the PinkUn app for all that fantastic content and yeah, all that stuff like that.
Brilliant. You've earned your wage. Brilliant, Adam.
The only main event is it's my no holidays this time round, but only because it's my sister's 21st birthday during this international break. So her and a cohort of her friends are coming down next weekend, which I think I've got a bit of taxiing duty from the train station back to my mum's house. And then yeah, she's got like a sort of party with family and friends next weekend. So it'd be good to see her because I've not seen her for a while. So sort of a bit of a family get together there, but aside from that, probably a load of DIY at my house, which is the most, not the most exciting of events, but I quite enjoy it. So maybe it's quite a highlight for me. Maybe that I've got a bit of painting, plastering, whatever it might be to do. So yeah, and then obviously the work meal in between. So plenty of stuff to maybe tip me over before the next one, which yeah, I'm looking forward almost to West Brom the other side, hopefully with some players back.
Yeah, obviously as you go on.
Are you asking the question? What you got?
Well, I was coming on to this. I was going to say, as you boys know, I'm missing West Brom. I'll actually be in London at the Paddington Bear experience, which I'm
That'll be a treat for you, wouldn't it?
really looking forward to. Yeah, obviously not the best South American export, which is clearly Marcelino Nunez and or Gabriel Sara. But yeah, it's not bad. A few. I watched the new Paddington film last night with my 4-year-old. He enjoyed that. So I don't think it was quite as good as Paddington 2. That's my critical review of it, but it was good. So yeah, I'll be missing that one. And yeah, it's his birthday in the second week of the international break. So turning 5, which is pretty mad. So that's my plan: blowing up balloons and eating cake and various things like that. So I'm sure you boys will enjoy West Brom, and yeah, hopefully we'll have a win to talk about. And then obviously it's Wayne Rooney's Plymouth the next time at Carrow Road. So yeah, it's going to go quickly, I'm sure, and we'll try and bring you everything as we can on the PinkUn channels. But for now, that seems like a nice place to end the pod. So thank you for watching. Thank you for listening. Enjoy the break. Watch your hamstrings. Don't do yourself any damage ahead of West Brom. And yeah, let's keep those fingers crossed and, I don't know, rub all the lamps that you've got and do all the various things that provoke luck that Norwich City's injury crisis is easing somewhat by the time that trip to the Hawthorns rolls around later this month. Thanks for watching. See you soon.